Okay, so for today, for Study Sunday, we're going to take a look at something different, which is nuclear fusion. Just kind of a bit of caveat at the beginning of this is I'm not a physicist, I'm not an expert in energy, I'm not an expert in these sorts of things, astrophysics. What my background is more philosophical, and we're going to be discussing the philosophical implications of the recent development as far as producing energy through nuclear fusion goes. The U.S. Department of Energy said on December 13th, 2022, that for the first time, and after several decades of trying, scientists have managed to get more energy out of the process than they had to put in. Okay, well, what implication does this have philosophically speaking? And I think what it reminded me of, or what it made me think of, and also sort of put a bit of a wrench in kind of the way I look at things philosophically, is I thought of Marcus Aurelius. Now, Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, and he wrote the Meditations, which is a spectacular piece of Stoic philosophy, and it is particularly fantastic because, okay, so from the Stoic perspective, I think this Marcus Aurelius quote kind of captures of it a little bit. You always own the option of having no opinion. There is never any need to get worked up or to trouble your soul about things you cannot control. These things are not asking to be judged by you. Leave them alone. And so what Stoic philosophy generally advocates for is a sort of just minding your own business and just thinking about minding your own business isn't quite a good capture of it, but it's that you should focus on the things within your control and not concern yourself with the things outside of your control. And in this way, you will not be emotionally disturbed. The general philosophy is that you should, not be disturbed by things that are outside your control and control your emotions. Okay, so this is something Marcus really advocated for. And what comes to mind about him specifically as it relates to this development in nuclear fusion is this quote kind of captures one of his ideas, which is that, in the short term, this is probably a good way to capture it. Things might seem like they really, really matter, but the sands of time kind of erase everything. So let's get in the quote. Casting aside other things, hold to the precious few, and besides bear in mind that every man lives only in the present, which is an indivisible point, and that all the rest of life is either past or uncertain. Brief is a man's life, yep, and the small is the nook of the earth on which he lives. Brief, too, is the longest posthumous fame, buoyed only by a succession of poor human beings who will very soon die, and who know little of themselves, much less of someone who died long ago. And so the point kind of to captured in this quote is that, in 50 years, 60 years after you die, almost everyone you knew personally will be dead, right? 150 years, chances are anyone who's ever heard of you will be dead, unless you do something, great or fantastic. But even then, thousands of years from now, those people will probably all be dead and you'll be long forgotten. There's not a lot of literature or any recordings from thousands of years ago. And even if there was, now there's such a huge glut of information. People who are thousands of years old don't get read that much. And the ones that do are just like the select few. But even if you somehow became one of those select few that had a really long impact, 10,000 years, 20,000 years, 30,000 years, the significance of our lives is kind of a ripple in the river of time, and it's not this very large thing. And the way I thought about it is I projected even further, and this is like my own philosophical kind of practice, wherein, the whole point of this Stoic perspective, by the way, is that you are focusing on things within your control, you're focusing on the present, and you are not being overly worried with something far, far off. And what was comforting to me, in an odd sort of way, is that, 100,000 years, 200,000 years, 500,000 years from now, like all my genetic material, even if I were to, for example, view my genetic passing on as a sort of way I could affect the future, 500,000 years from now, any sort of genetic material that makes me distinct from any other human in any of my descendants will be long erased. 2.5 billion years from now, which is, okay, that's a way bigger jump. Let's take a smaller jump. 50 million years from now, humanity will look nothing like it looks now, and even less so, 300, 400, 500 million years from now, 2.5 billion years from now, the Earth will be destroyed. And the eventual sort of regress of this, in my mind, was the heat death of the universe. And so in my mind, at the very end, the end result for existence is the same, and that is the heat death of the universe, also known as the Big Chill or Big Freeze, is a hypothesis on the ultimate fate of the universe, which suggests the universe will evolve into a state of no thermodynamic energy, i.e., can't support life at all, and will therefore be unable to sustain processes that increase entropy. Heat death does not imply any particular absolute temperature. It only requires that temperature differences or other processes may no longer be exploited to perform work. In the language of physics, this is when the universe reaches a thermodynamic equilibrium. The heat death theory became the leading theory in the modern age with the fewest unpredictable factors. Now, just to be clear, I'm not a physicist, and so I do not have a robust, kind of background in understanding the heat death of the universe, but my understanding was eventually life just can't be supported because the universe grows cold. And so this to me was a bit of a comfort of sorts, in the sense that, I can focus on, I do not have to worry about my actions catastrophically affecting the future, let's say. Although that's kind of a grim way of putting it, but you get the idea. Well, nuclear fusion changes that. Because it's sort of, unless I'm misunderstanding nuclear fusion, which I very may well be, creates this situation where in theory you could fuse stuff to create energy, and then engage in nuclear fission to break it down to create energy, and so there is no heat death of the universe. Or there is unlimited energy. This is, in my mind, what an efficient nuclear fission process would allow. Now, this is not necessarily efficient, but it did have more inputs than it had outputs. So, how big a deal is this result? Fusion has been the long holy grail of energy production for nearly half a century. While a gain of 1.5, I believe, is truly historic scientific breakthrough, there's still a long way to go before fusion is a viable source. So what happened is the lasers that fired in 2 million joules, and then they got more than 3 million joules. This just says 3 million joules. My understanding it was 3.5. It took the facility nearly 300 million joules to produce the lasers used in this experiment. So it's still not completely net positive, but the interaction itself, the 2 million in, 3 million, 3.5, 3 million out, is kind of a proof of concept that in theory unlimited energy is possible. But this is where my knowledge of this kind of is limiting, because I don't know if you can only fuse hydrogen atoms. Where nuclear fission takes place is with really, really heavy elements, and where fusion takes place is with really, really light elements. But if it is possible, then it is no longer the case that there was an eventual heat death of the universe, and therefore things can matter in a really, really long-term way. Now, of course, you still have the thing where, 200 years from now, anyone who's ever heard of you is probably going to be dead. 1,000 years from now, no one will ever know who you were, unless you are a very, 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 very small minority of humanity. 100,000 years, 500,000 years from now, humanity won't even look like humanity, and these sorts of things. So I still think that Marcus Aurelius himself is a bit on the nose with, every man lives only in the present. Of course, I would say human, but which is an indivisible point, and that all the rest of life is either past or uncertain. But that I found while I was looking through these Marcus Aurelius quotes. By the way, you can find a ton of his quotes on Goodreads, which is probably, or I don't know if it's a better way to read him, but the Meditations, which is his book, is a little bit of a slog, and so you can just go through quotes on Goodreads to kind of find the good snippets. The context is not overwhelmingly, I think, important. Not that it's unimportant, but relative to other books, he has more of an aphoristic style where, not having the paragraph before the paragraph behind is not the biggest deal. But I found this other quote here that I found very disturbing in terms of existential angst, I suppose. What we do now echoes in eternity, which is very much a departure from this quote, which is that, you will be erased by the sands of time, and this was it echoes in eternity. And so I found this quote pretty amusing. And so the philosophical implications of, there not being a heat death of the universe is that, the Stoic sort of, you can no longer take this sort of chain of thinking where the eventual entropy of the universe is a sort of comfort or reason to think and be in the now, and focus on the present. And instead, there is this sort of lingering sort of issue that what we do now echoes in eternity, and okay, it's kind of amusing that Aurelius kind of has these two contradictory quotes, but a lot of philosophers do this. And now the question kind of at hand is, or in my mind regarding this like nuclear fusion, is now a lot of things seem to matter a lot. And this is for my own like personal perspective. This was kind of profound, and it left me like scratching my head whether it's something to be celebrated or perhaps like not necessarily not celebrated, but disturbing in the sense that now I have to care about things that I did not previously care about, philosophically speaking, because the heat death of the universe was a rather convenient sort of, saying, oh, in the end, but there's this heat death of the universe. I do not have to think of the super long-term implications of things, and now, stuff like in general, I'm not a fan of the going to Mars type bit. I think that, terraforming Mars is going to be more expensive than cleaning up the Earth, like pretty much no matter what. And so like these types of things, but the eventual like going into space and avoiding the explosion of the Earth or like the sun, which by the way is not the event that's going to kill humanity. I believe the moon is drifting further and further away every year, and that will cause like catastrophic like weather events, and that this would like cause the death of humanity before the explosion of the sun. But these types of like long-reaching things now suddenly matter a bit in a way that they did not, in my mind, without this nuclear fusion bit. And so this is something I found very thought-provoking, and I'm still sorting through my thoughts on this. If this is seeming like a bit of a ramble, it's because to some degree I am sorting through my thoughts on this while I'm thinking it out. But it is a sort of weird, or it has implications for Stoic philosophy. Here, I think I have something. Yeah. So up here, this is kind of like a flow chart that I think it pretty well captures Stoicism. I guess I probably should have held this up earlier in the video, but you asked, should this concern me? Should this concern myself? And the answer is it under my control? If no, don't worry about it. Is it partly under my control? Distinguish between whether or not it is, and if it isn't, don't worry about it. If it is under your control, does it concern virtue? The answer is no. Then is it indifferent? If the answer is it's dispreferred. Sorry, I can't pronounce words. You can like, I guess, look at the flowchart. Is it preferred? And then you prefer those. And then if it is concerning virtue, do it in practice. And so it's this thing where it's like, if it's not under your control, like this bit where is it under your control or not, is just like the ultimate like embodiment or like sort of idea of Stoic philosophy is if it's not in your control, you don't care at all. But now, the eventual heat death of the universe, which was previously did not seem under humanity's control, is potentially under humanity's control if humanity can produce unlimited energy, which, in my mind, the developments in nuclear fusion imply that it is possible. I thought it was previously impossible. So now I'm philosophically reeling a little bit. Anyways, I think if I go on any further, it'll be a bit of a ramble, more so than it is. So I'm going to conclude the video. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, share, whatever. Do the YouTube algorithm stuff. Have a good day. If you've been sitting watching YouTube for a long time already, not going to say you shouldn't watch any more YouTube, but maybe get up, get a glass of water, stretch your legs, these sorts of things. They're not particularly attractive in terms of like what's attention grabbing, which of course is whatever's off to the side or what have you, or the next upcoming video, but it's good for your health and this sort of thing. Anyways, have a good one.